Have you ever, felt like you needed to just tear down everything you thought you knew, start completely
Or
fresh?
maybe just felt drowned in information, wondering what's actually real, what you can truly trust.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that kind of fundamental questioning is really where we're kicking off this deep dive.
Okay.
We're digging into some uh, really foundational philosophical texts today. We've got excerpts from René Descartes' Meditations on first philosophy,
The big one.
and also some bits from the objections and replies,
hmm
the arguments and discussions that happened right after it was published.
So we get the main ideas and the immediate pushback. That sounds useful.
Definitely. Our mission, really, is to explore Descartes' pretty radical approach to finding certainty. Absolute certainty.
Right. How does he even attempt that?
We'll follow his method of doubt, see how he lands on what he thinks is an unshakable foundation,
Okay.
and then watch him try to rebuild knowledge from there.
hmm
About himself, God, the physical world, the works.
And you mentioned the source itself has a particular style.
Yeah, this is interesting. Descartes didn't just write it down like, here are my conclusions. He actually framed the meditations as an exercise for you, the reader.
So I'm supposed to be the one thinking it through.
That's the idea, the I in the text. Well, that could be you. It's an invitation to do the philosophizing yourself right alongside him.
Okay, I'm game. Let's step into that role. So, where does this philosophical demolition project begin?
Well, Descartes starts by reflecting. He looks back at all the beliefs he'd soaked up since childhood,
Uh-huh.
and he has this, uncomfortable realization that a lot of it, it might be false, built on shaky ground.
So the whole structure seems questionable.
Exactly. He uses the word doubtful. And he decides, okay, just once in my life, I need to actually try and demolish everything,
Yeah.
right down to the foundations, and start over.
Wow. That sounds exhausting. Is he really going to examine every single little belief he has?
Oh, no. Thankfully, he realizes that's impossible. It would take forever.
Okay, good. So what's
But
the plan?
the strategy isn't to check every single brick, you see. It's to attack the basic principles,
Right.
the core assumptions holding everything else up.
Right. If the foundations crumble,
Then everything built on them collapses too.
Yeah.
Much more efficient.
makes sense. So where does he start digging? What's the first shaky foundation he targets?
He goes right for the senses, our sight, hearing, touch, all of it.
The most obvious source of information, usually.
Right. But he gives these classic examples, like a distant tower looks round, but get closer, it's square.
Or that stick and water trick. Looks bent, but it's straight.
Exactly. Simple examples, but they make the point. Our senses can, sometimes, deceive us.
And that little crack opens up a bigger worry, doesn't it? If they can fool me sometimes.
How can I be absolutely 100% sure they aren't fooling me right now? About this specific thing I think I'm seeing or hearing.
Yeah, that's unsettling.
It is. And this leads him to escalate the doubt. He pushes it further with the famous dream argument.
Ah, yes. How do I know I'm not dreaming this whole conversation?
Precisely. He asks, how can you be certain? The source even says there are no certain marks, no definitive signs to distinguish waking life from dreaming.
Anything I experience awake, however vivid, I could theoretically dream just as vividly.
That's the disturbing possibility he raises.
Okay. That's already pretty deep doubt. Does he go even further?
Oh, yes. To really test any potential certainty, to make sure it can withstand anything, he introduces a kind of ultimate skeptical hypothesis.
Which is?
The idea of a deceiving God, or maybe a powerful, malicious, evil demon.
Whoa. Okay.
What if, he asks, there's some super powerful being whose whole goal is to trick me about everything, even things that seem incredibly obvious like basic math?
Now hang on. He doesn't actually believe there's an evil demon doing this, does he?
No, not at all. It's purely a thought experiment, a tool. The text calls it a metaphysical reason for doubt. It's designed to be the absolute most extreme skepticism imaginable,
Why? What's the point of pushing it that far?
to see if anything survives. If he can find even one belief that holds up even against the possibility of an all-powerful deceiver, then that belief must be truly certain.
Ah, okay. So the goal isn't just to doubt everything and stay there. It's to use doubt to find something doubt-proof.
Exactly right. It's a method, a controlled demolition, like you said earlier. He uses skepticism, you could call it preemptive skepticism, to clear the ground. He's hoping to hit bedrock, something unshakable.
It's fascinating how the objections show people grappling with this immediately. Like the dream argument critics jumped on that, right? Saying, well, if senses can be fooled in dreams, how do you ever get out of that doubt?
Yeah, they did. Descartes' reply, basically, was that when you're genuinely awake, you sort of know it. He talks about a coherence or clarity in waking life.
Yeah.
He says, for as long as we are fully awake, we cannot doubt whether we are awake or dreaming.
I can see why critics might not have found that totally convincing on its own.
It's definitely debated. And other objectors had a different take on the senses. They argued maybe the senses themselves aren't the liars. Maybe the problem is our judgment.
How so?
Like seeing figures far off, you see hats and cloaks, and you judge there, man, maybe you judge too quickly. They suggested senses, if you use them carefully together and correct your judgments, are reliable. The error is in the mind's interpretation, not the raw data.
Okay, so he's put everything through this intense doubt. Senses, dreams, the physical world, maybe even math, thanks to the evil demon idea. Where does that leave him? Where do I stand if I'm following along?
He describes it vividly. It feels like falling into a deep whirlpool, can't find your footing, can't swim up, just chaos and uncertainty.
A scary place to be, philosophically speaking.
Totally. But in the very midst of this intense effort to doubt everything, trying to think that everything is false, he notices something he can't doubt. While he's doubting, he realizes that he, the one doing the doubting, must exist. To be deceived, even by an evil demon, you have to be something that is being deceived. To think, you have to exist.
The famous line, I am thinking, therefore I exist.
That's the core insight. The Cogito, as it's known. The source says this truth that I, who was thinking this was something, felt so firm and sure that even the wildest skeptical ideas couldn't touch it.
This is it. This is his bedrock, his first principle.
Exactly. The unshakable point he was searching for through all that doubt.
Okay, so he exists, but what kind of thing is this I that he's discovered?
Well, think about how he found it. Through the act of thinking, doubting, being aware. So he concludes fundamentally he is a thing that thinks.
It's a thinking thing. What does that include?
The text elaborates. It's a thing that doubts, understands, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, and also imagines and has sensory perceptions. All these activities fall under thinking for Descartes.
Right, and this is where he makes that really big and pretty controversial move about the mind and body, isn't it?
Yes. This is crucial. Based on this discovery, he argues that this I, this thinking thing, is entirely distinct from any physical body he might or might not have.
How does he figure that?
Because he's certain he exists as a thinking thing, even while doubting the existence of his body and the entire physical world. So he reasons his existence as a thinking thing doesn't depend on having a body.
So the mind, the thinking self, is fundamentally non-physical, incorporeal.
That's his controversial thesis. He argues this thinking self would not fail to be what it is, even if the body did not exist. This sets up that famous mind-body dualism, two distinct kinds of substances.
But the objectors didn't just let that slide, did they? They questioned the Cogito itself.
Oh, absolutely. Some ask, hold on, how can you be certain you're thinking or existing if you haven't even defined what those terms mean yet? You're using concepts you haven't secured.
That's a fair point. How did he respond?
Descartes basically replied that it's a direct intuition. I think and I am thinking mean the same thing in this context. And it's self-evident that that which thinks is not nothing. It's something you just grasp directly.
Okay. What about the thinking thing part? Did they challenge that definition?
Yes. Another rejection was like, okay, you say you're a thing that thinks, doubts, wills, etc., but those are just activities or properties.
Yeah.
What is the underlying thing, the substance that has these properties? They wanted to know about the inner nature of this thinking thing.
In Descartes' view.
He maintained that we know substances through their attributes. The more attributes of the mind we clearly perceive knowing, willing, doubting, sensing, the more perfectly we understand its nature, its substance. The attributes reveal the thing.
All right. So he's got his first certainty. I exist as a thinking thing. How does he build outwards from just himself? How does he know anything else?
Right. That's the next big step. He uses an example that's become really famous. A piece of wax.
The wax example.
He takes a piece of wax, fresh from the honeycomb. He describes its sensory qualities. It has a certain smell, color, shape, feel. It's hard, cold. You can tap it. It makes a sound.
Got it. Very specific sensory data.
But then he brings it near a fire.
And everything changes?
Completely. The smell goes away. The color changes. The shape is lost. It gets hot, becomes liquid. All the sensory information is different.
They still know it's the same piece of wax.
Exactly. That's the core point. How do you know it's the same wax when all the sensory properties have changed? It can't be just through the senses.
So where does that knowledge come from?
He concludes it comes from the mind alone. An inspection by the mind, he calls it. It's an act of understanding, of judgment. He even relates it to seeing people outside. He says you see hats and cloaks, but you judge them to be men underneath. It's more than just raw sense data.
So understanding even physical objects requires this mental processing, this thinking thing I know myself to be.
Precisely. And this leads him to another conclusion. He compares his understanding of the wax, a physical object, to his understanding of himself. And he argues that his knowledge of his own mind is actually clearer, more distinct, more certain than his knowledge of the wax or any physical object.
How does that follow?
Because every act of perceiving or judging the wax, even doubting it, confirms his own existence as the one doing the perceiving, judging, or doubting. Every thought about the external world loops back and reinforces the certainty of the thinking eye.
Okay, I see the logic there. But I bet the objectors had something to say about the wax, too. Did they buy that it proves the mind is better known than the body?
They definitely pushed back. One line of argument was, look, you listed all these changing attributes of the wax, but you didn't tell us what the underlying substance of the wax is either. So maybe you don't understand the body that well after all.
Kind of turning his own argument back on him.
Sort of. And again, Descartes fell back on his idea that knowing attributes is how we grasp substance. Another objection brought up animals. They mentioned a dog recognizing its owner just by their clothes. Isn't that a kind of judgment based on sense data? Does that mean dogs have minds like ours? It questioned if this mental inspection was uniquely human or purely intellectual.
Right. Okay, so he's certain he exists as a thinking thing, but he's still potentially trapped by that evil demon idea, right? How does he get certainty about anything outside his own mind, like the external world? Or even mathematics?
This is where God comes in. He realizes that if his clear and distinct perceptions are going to be reliable guides to truth, there needs to be some guarantee that they aren't just illusions produced by a deceiver.
He needs a trustworthy source for his clear ideas.
Exactly. So he starts analyzing the ideas in his mind. He notes that ideas, just considered as mental events, aren't true or false in themselves. Like whether I imagine a goat or a unicorn, it's true that I'm imagining.
Okay, the error comes later.
Error comes when I make a judgment that the idea corresponds to something real outside my mind.
Right, and then he brings in this distinction about reality, objective and formal reality.
Yes, this is a key and sometimes tricky part of his argument. Ideas, he says, have objective reality. That's the reality of the thing represented by the idea, the content of the idea. Things existing outside the mind have formal reality, actual existence.
Okay. So the idea of the sun has objective reality, the actual sun has formal reality.
You got it. And here's the crucial principle he relies on. The cause of an idea must have at least as much formal reality as the idea has objective reality.
Say that again.
Basically, the reality or perfection represented in an idea must come from a cause that actually possesses that reality or perfection, either formally, meaning in the same way, or eminently, meaning in a higher way. Something cannot come from nothing. The effect can't be greater than the cause.
Okay, I think I followed. The source of an idea needs to be real enough to produce that idea's content.
Exactly. Now, apply that to the idea of God.
What is his idea of God?
He describes it as the idea of a substance that is infinite, eternal, immutable, independent, supremely intelligent, supremely powerful, the creator of everything. It's the idea of a being with infinite perfections.
So that idea has infinite objective reality, representing infinite perfection.
Right. Now, where could that idea come from? According to his causal principle, the cause must have at least infinite formal reality.
And the only thing with infinite formal reality is God himself.
Precisely his argument. He says he couldn't have produced this idea. Why? Because he's finite, imperfect, full of doubt. The idea of infinite perfection can't originate from a finite, imperfect being.
It had to come from outside him, from something actually infinitely perfect.
That's the claim. He also adds a point about his own existence. The fact that he exists from moment to moment requires some ongoing cause of preservation, which points towards a self-sufficient, perfect being rather than himself.
Okay, so he thinks this proves God exists, and what's the big payoff of that?
The payoff is huge for his project. If God is supremely perfect, possessing all perfections like infinite goodness and power, then God cannot be a deceiver. Deception, he argues, is a sign of weakness or malice and imperfection.
So no evil demon.
Exactly. A perfect God wouldn't deceive him. And this means
that his clear and distinct perceptions must be true, because God guarantees them.
That's the cornerstone. A non-deceiving God becomes the guarantor of knowledge. If he perceives something with clarity and distinctness, he can trust it.
That's a massive step. But I imagine the objectors had a field day with this argument too, especially that causal principle.
Oh, absolutely. The fifth set of objections in particular really goes after it. They question the whole objective versus formal reality thing and fundamentally challenge that causal principle itself. Does an idea's content really require a cause with matching actual reality? They basically said you need to justify that premise a lot more strongly.
And Descartes' defense.
He defended it as a primary notion, something self-evident that you grasp through careful attention. A bit like saying something can't come from nothing is just obviously true.
Okay, so that's one argument for God. But didn't he have another one based on the definition of God itself, the ontological argument?
Yes, in the fifth meditation, he offers a different approach. This one doesn't rely on cause and effect, but purely on analyzing the concept or essence of God.
How does that work?
He asks you to examine the idea of God defined as a supremely perfect being. Just like when you examine the idea of a triangle, you find properties that necessarily belong to it, like its angle summing 280 degrees.
Okay, that's part of the definition, the essence of a triangle.
Right. Now, Descartes argues, when you examine the idea of a supremely perfect being, you find that existence is one of those necessary perfections.
Wait, existence is a perfection, like wisdom or power.
That's his claim, and it's the controversial part. He argues you cannot conceive of a supremely perfect being without existence, just like you can't conceive of a triangle without its properties. To lack existence would be an imperfection, so a supremely perfect being must exist.
He compares it to a mountain and a valley, right? You can't think of one without the other, but that doesn't mean they exist out there. How is God different?
He says the mountain-valley link is just conceptual linkage between two finite things. But with God, the link is between the concept, supreme perfection, and existence itself. He claims you cannot coherently think of God not existing. The necessity lies in the thing itself, the essence of God, not just in his thought.
So his thought doesn't make God exist, but his thought recognizes that existence is part of God's very nature.
That's the idea. Existence is inseparable from the essence of a supremely perfect being, therefore, God necessarily exists.
And the objectors, I can almost hear them. Existence isn't a property.
Exactly. That was a major line of attack, especially in the first and fifth objections. Critics like Gassendi and Catullus argued strongly that existence isn't a perfection you add to a concept. It's more like the condition for having any perfections at all.
Right. A non-existent thing isn't imperfect, it just isn't. An existing thing has perfections, but existence isn't one of them.
That's the core critique. They argued the analogy with the triangle's properties is flawed because geometrical properties are part of a definition, while existence is about whether something instantiates that definition in reality.
How did Descartes defend this?
He essentially doubled down, arguing that while it might seem strange at first, careful reflection shows that existence is implied by supreme perfection, especially supreme power. A being that has all perfections must necessarily have the perfection of existence. He tried to distinguish his argument from earlier versions, focusing on how the idea itself reveals this necessary connection.
Okay, so let's assume for a moment he's established God exists and isn't a deceiver. This guarantees his clear and distinct perceptions, but we all know we make mistakes. We err. If our minds come from a perfect, non-deceiving God, why do we mess up? That seems like a problem.
It is. This is the classic problem of error, and Descartes tackles it directly. He knows from experience he's fallible. So how is error possible?
Yeah, how?
He says errors arise from the interplay of two faculties within him. The faculty of knowledge, which is the intellect, and the faculty of choice, which is the will.
Intellect and will. Okay.
The intellect, he argues, is the faculty that perceives ideas. Considered just by itself, the intellect doesn't really make mistakes. It just presents ideas to the mind, some clear, some confused. It doesn't affirm or deny them.
So the intellect is like the screen showing images. No error there yet. What about the will?
The will, or freedom of choice, is the faculty that affirms or denies, that makes judgments. And Descartes finds his will is, in a sense, perfect. It's not restricted in any way. He feels he has complete freedom to assent or not assent.
Wait, his will is perfect, but doesn't that make the problem worse? If intellect is okay and will is perfect, where does the error come from?
Here's the key. The scope of the will is wider than the scope of the intellect.
Meaning?
Meaning his will can jump ahead and make judgments, even when his intellect doesn't have a clear and distinct understanding of the matter. The intellect might present a fuzzy or incomplete idea, but the will is still free to say, yep, that's true, or nope, that's false.
So I make mistakes when I use my free will to judge things I don't fully understand clearly.
Exactly. When the intellect lacks clear and distinct perception, the will is technically indifferent. But if you choose to affirm or deny anyway, extending your will beyond what you clearly know, that's when you risk falling into error. You turn aside from truth and goodness.
So error isn't a faulty part given by God, but a misuse of the parts. A consequence of having infinite freedom of will operating on finite understanding.
That's precisely his explanation. The key to avoiding error, then, is to only assent to things you perceive clearly and distinctly with your intellect. Restrain the will when understanding is fuzzy.
Did the objectors buy this?
They largely agreed that error involves both intellect and will, but they pushed back a bit, asking why God would create him with this particular setup, this potential mismatch where the will can outrun the intellect, making error possible. Even if God doesn't owe him a better design, why this specific kind of imperfection?
What was his answer to that?
He basically reiterated that the error doesn't lie in the faculties God gave him, which are good in themselves. It arises indirectly because of the kind of being he is, finite intellect combined with infinite will. It's a feature of being a created, free being, not a direct flaw planted by God.
Okay. So with God established as a non-deceiver, guaranteeing clear and distinct perceptions, can he finally definitively prove that the external material world exists? Chairs, tables, stars, all that.
Yes, this is where he brings it home. He looks at his faculty of imagination again. The very fact that he can imagine physical things, particularly geometrical shapes and their properties, like extension, duration, movement, suggests they exist.
How does imagination suggest existence?
Well, he can clearly and distinctly understand mathematical properties of objects like a triangle's properties. He knows God is powerful enough to create anything he can clearly and distinctly conceive. Since God is not a deceiver, God wouldn't give him this strong inclination to believe in material things corresponding to his clear geometrical ideas unless they actually existed.
So the existence of material things, especially their mathematical structure, is guaranteed by God's non-deceptive nature applied to his clear ideas.
That's the argument. He trusts his clear and distinct perception of bodies as primarily extended things, things that take up space.
And does imagination play any other role here? He mentioned it takes effort.
Right. He contrasts imagination with pure understanding. Just understanding the definition of, say, a pentagon is easy. But imagining it, forming a mental picture, takes a specific, peculiar effort of mind.
Okay.
This effort, he suggests, points to imagination being linked to something other than his pure mind, likely a body. It feels like the mind turning towards a body to form these images. It reinforces the idea that imagination isn't essential to his core self, the thinking thing, but depends on something else.
Which brings us back full circle to the mind-body distinction. How does he finalize that argument now?
Now that he's more confident about the existence of body, he solidifies the distinction. He argues, 1. I can clearly and distinctly understand myself as only a thinking, non-extended thing. 2. I can clearly and distinctly understand body as only an extended, non-thinking thing. 3. Whatever I can clearly conceive as separate, God can create as separate. 4. Therefore, my mind and my body are really distinct substances and can exist apart.
He also adds that the mind seems indivisible, while the body is always divisible into parts, right? Another point of difference.
Yes, that's another supporting argument he uses. You can't conceptually divide the I, the self, into parts, but any physical object can be broken down.
Okay, so they're distinct substances, but my everyday experience screams that they're connected. Pain, hunger, thirst.
Absolutely. Descartes doesn't deny this at all. He says that despite being distinct, mind and body are so closely joined and intermingled that they form a kind of unit, a composite being.
How does he explain that connection?
He says nature teaches him this union through sensations like pain, hunger, thirst. These aren't intellectual deductions. There's no logical reason why a lack of food should feel like hunger. It's just how we're built. These feelings signal the mind about the body's needs or condition.
So when I stub my toe, it's not just a physical event.
Right. He envisions nerves transmitting signals from the toe to the brain, and then somehow this brain event causes a sensation of pain in the mind. It's a system established by nature, ultimately by God, to help preserve the mind-body composite.
But as he acknowledges, the system isn't foolproof. Sensory errors happen.
Yes, he revisits this. The system can mislead us. He gives the example of someone with dropsy who feels thirsty even though drinking would harm them. Or phantom limb pain, feeling pain in a limb that's not there.
So how does he account for those errors if nature gods set up the system?
He argues the system is generally reliable and designed for the health of the whole organism in typical situations.
Mm.
It's optimized for the usual case. Sometimes, due to unusual physical conditions like disease or amputation, the signals get crossed, leading to misleading sensations. But sensory perceptions are, by their nature, often confused and obscure compared to intellectual understanding.
And you can bet the objectors had issues with proving the mind-body distinction just based on being able to conceive them separately.
You bet right. This was a major point of contention. Critics argued that just because you can think of A without B doesn't automatically mean A can exist without B in reality.
They used his own method against him, like the triangle example.
Exactly. One objection was like this. You might clearly understand what a right-angled triangle is without realizing that the square of its hypotenuse equals the sum of the squares of the other two sides. But that property is part of its essential nature. You just had an inadequate conception initially.
So maybe extension is part of the mind's essential nature, even if Descartes could conceive of himself without it. His conception might have been inadequate.
That was the challenge. Descartes had to defend his claim that his conceptions of mind as purely thinking and body as purely extended were indeed adequate and captured their true essences, allowing him to conclude they were really distinct substances capable of separate existence.
It really highlights how tricky it is to move from thoughts and concepts to claims about actual reality.
Absolutely. That's one of the enduring challenges in philosophy that Descartes brings into sharp focus.
Wow. Okay, let's try and pull back and see the whole arc here. We've been on quite a journey through these texts.
We really have.
Yeah.
It started with that incredibly radical step. Doubt everything. Just demolish the assumptions based on senses, dreams, even the possibility of a cosmic deceiver.
Right. Wiping the slate clean, then finding that one Archimedean point, that first certainty.
And the very act of doubting itself. I am thinking, therefore I exist. The Cogito. Establishing the self, the I, as fundamentally a thinking thing, distinct from body.
Then, the crucial step outwards, proving God's existence, both through the idea of perfection needing a perfect cause.
And through the ontological argument, the idea that existence is part of God's very essence. And crucially, this God must be perfect and therefore not a deceiver.
Which became the ultimate guarantor, allowing him to trust his clear and distinct perceptions.
Which then let him tackle the problem of error, explaining it not as a flaw in God's design, but as a result of our free will, sometimes overreaching our finite understanding.
And with that guarantee in place, he could finally establish the existence of the material world, things corresponding to our clear ideas of extension.
And solidify that mind-body distinction, two separate substances, thinking and extension, while still acknowledging they are somehow deeply intertwined in our lived experience, taught by nature through sensation.
It's quite a structure he builds. And remember, the point wasn't just to read about Descartes' journey, but potentially to take it yourself. As you, listening, followed along, how did it feel? Did it challenge how you think about knowledge? Certainty. The connection between your own thoughts and, well, your physical self.
Yeah. Are there ideas you're less certain about now? Or maybe more certain? Does the idea of needing clear and distinct perception resonate with how you evaluate information today?
And we saw how important those objections were. They weren't just nitpicking. They really pushed Descartes, forced clarifications, highlighted the tricky spots. It shows how dialogue and challenge are vital to philosophical progress.
Definitely enrich the whole process.
So Descartes aimed for absolute certainty, grounded in clear perception guaranteed by a non-deceiving God. But listening to those objectors, thinking about their critiques, the nature of existence, the foundation of the Cogito, whether conception really proves separation, the lingering possibility of subtle errors, well, it makes you wonder. How truly unshakable are those foundations he built?
Right. And what does that whole attempt and the challenges it faced tell us about our own ongoing quest for reliable knowledge, for certainty, in a world that feels, if anything, even more flooded with questionable information than Descartes was?